Hello everyone, I'm Ron Berger, and this is the Astrology News Report. Today is November 27th, 2017. This is the special report section where I take a topic or person or situation that is pertinent to world events and do an in-depth astrological analysis. This will be a special predictive report on the final Mercury retrograde period of 2017. But before we begin, a little reminder to all my viewers. I know we are all used to getting everything for free on the internet, but it does take a whole day of my time to put one of these videos together, and I do have bills to pay. Do you like what I'm doing here? Please support this work. Even $10 helps. Just click on or touch the donation link at the end of the video. Thanks. Every 4 months or so, the planet of rational thinking appears to travel backwards in the zodiac for a period of about 3 weeks. Starting on Sunday, December 3rd, Mercury begins a retrograde phase at 5 degrees sidereal Sagittarius. The apparent reverse motion of a planet is due to the concentric orbits of the solar system and the fact that we are viewing the other planets from a moving vantage point, the Earth, such that, on occasion, we are going ahead of another planet, which makes that planet appear to be traveling in reverse against the backdrop of the stars. So, it's an optical illusion of sorts. But for astrology purposes, retrograde motion definitely changes the behavior of the planet's energy. Mercury is the planet of rational thinking, the planet of reasoning, therefore the planet of making decisions. When Mercury is backwards in the heavens, it's harder to make rational decisions. Mercury is also the planet of communications, of speech and writing. When a planet is retrograde, its significations don't operate in the normal way, so communications get screwed up, resulting in misunderstandings. A planet that is held back from normal progress delays its normal manifestations, so communications and decisions get delayed during Mercury retrograde. Similarly, your source of data and information, in other words, the media, is also suspect while Mercury is retrograde. Now, this particular Mercury retrograde period gets a bit complicated due to the involvement of a number of other astrological factors. So bear with me while I do some explaining. When Mercury begins this retrograde period, it will be conjunct Saturn. This puts the planet of ideas and reasons together with the reality check planet, the planet of responsibility, forcing everyone to come to terms with reality and be responsible. Saturn is the planet of time and longevity. With Mercury, the planet of making decisions, conjunct Saturn, there are long-term consequences from any decisions that are made. But while Mercury is retrograde, those decisions may be irrational. So, best to not risk making important decisions at this time. Since Mercury begins its retrograde phase near the beginning of Sagittarius, it won't take too long before it backs out of that sign and enters the previous sign, sidereal Scorpio, which it does on December 10th. In so doing, Mercury will escape from the ill effects of Saturn, but now the backwards Mercury will have to manifest through the venue of Scorpio, a sign that is noted for secret actions, conspiracies, investigations, lust for power, and questionable alliances. While in Scorpio, retrograde Mercury encounters Venus, which entered this sign in late November. Venus is the planet of love and romance. Retrograde Mercury signifies misunderstandings. Scorpio is a passionate sign. So, problems in the romance department. The exact conjunction will be on December 15th at 23 degrees Scorpio. Venus is also the planet of guidance and advice. Putting retrograde Mercury together with Venus in Scorpio, a sign noted for doing whatever it needs to get what it wants, this can lead to misleading advice, which could even have an underhanded purpose. Thus, This combination is somewhat suspicious, where the misunderstandings generated by retrograde Mercury could be used, along with the seductiveness of Venus in Scorpio, to create situations that favor immoral or unethical purposes. So, to sum up, this Mercury retrograde period has two parts. The first 8 days will be in Sagittarius with Saturn, manifesting as having to deal with consequences of making choices and past actions, as well as the usual misunderstandings and misinterpretations, which may themselves have long-term effects. The remainder of the retrograde occurs in Scorpio with Venus, creating misunderstandings in romance, as well as a potential to manifest in more sinister ways, such as seduction for nefarious purposes or misleading advice. And then, finally, on December 22nd, Mercury retrograde ends at 18 degrees Scorpio. The planet of rational thinking slowly returns to normal forward motion over the next several days, and Mercury significations likewise slowly return to normal. Now I will go through the zodiac and analyze what can be expected for each of the Vedic astrology rising signs. Again, this is the sidereal zodiac. If you are thinking of your Western astrology chart, you have to subtract 24 degrees to get the sidereal position of your rising sign. Also, as with all transits, the interpretation can be read from your natal moon sign and from your current major period ruler, if you know it, for additional insight into effects. My apologies if what follows sounds mostly negative. Well, let's admit it. Mercury retrograde periods are times when things are more likely to screw up. Mostly this amounts to annoyances, misunderstandings, inconvenience, which you can avoid by being on your guard, by bringing more awareness to situations, especially in your interactions with others. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there are some things that Mercury retrograde periods can be useful for, so here they are. Mercury retrograde is good for going back over things, editing, making corrections, checking your facts, or checking your transactions. Mercury retrograde is also good for getting back in touch, returning past correspondence, paying past bills, finishing up past business. Just remember to be extra careful about the details. Okay, so here's some of what to expect for each rising sign. If you are Aries rising, Mercury will be retrograde with Saturn in your 9th house, affecting relations with father and or guru, and causing delay to any travel plans. This is the house of higher learning. Retrograde Mercury makes higher studies more difficult, which are likely difficult anyway because Saturn is here. When Mercury backs into Scorpio, it will join Venus in your 8th house of financial arrangements with others. So be careful when dealing with money, especially someone else's money. The 8th house is secret actions. Venus is romance, as well as advice. Retrograde Mercury means misinterpretation. Be careful that you don't get misled into some ill-advised affair that may even lead to humiliation. For Taurus rising people, Mercury retrograde starts out in your 8th house. The combination with Saturn, a planet indicating restriction, ensures problems with your partner's money and may deny access to any unearned wealth, such as a bank loan. The 8th house is changes and transformations. Saturn stands for longevity, and Mercury retrograde creates mistakes. This would be a poor time to initiate any important change, which would have an element of miscalculation that would be hard and maybe even impossible to correct. When Mercury shifts to Scorpio, it will affect your 7th house, where it will mess up your relationship with your partner, causing mistakes in communications with your significant other, and due to combining with Venus, missed cues in the romance department. If you have Gemini as your rising sign, Mercury retrograde begins in your 7th house, where Saturn has already been causing you problems in your one-on-one relationships, which will likely get worse as communication now breaks down further. When Mercury backs into Scorpio, it brings trouble to your 6th house of employment, indicating issues with communications on the job front, such as with coworkers. Retrograde Mercury in your 6th house is problematic for health. Since it is the thinking planet, health problems come from chaotic thinking. Venus, the planet of guidance, is here as well, which could cause difficulties due to bad advice, for instance, from a health practitioner, so be sure to get a second opinion. For Cancer rising people, the Mercury retrograde period starts out conjunct Saturn in your 6th house. This is a rather adverse combination, since the misunderstandings caused by Mercury retrograde are combining with the longevity factor signified by Saturn in your 6th house of struggles, indicating a protracted situation. The problem can arise in your work area, such as with a coworker or employee, since the 6th house is employment. Then, when Mercury retrogrades into Scorpio and connects with Venus, it will manifest in your 5th house of romance, children, and teachers, indicating problems with your lover or child or a teacher. With Venus plus retrograde Mercury in Scorpio in the house of romance, you have to be careful of being lured into a questionable affair. Leo rising charts have Sagittarius as their 5th house, so the retrograde Mercury-Saturn combination will bring problems to your interactions with your child and or misunderstanding with lover. This is also the house of creativity. Now would not be a good time to begin a new creative project. After a week, Mercury retrogrades into your 4th house, where it screws things up on the domestic front, and by combining with Venus could deny you satisfaction from the comforts of home. Communications with your mother will suffer, and you may be in for some repairs to home or car. Virgo rising people get the first part of Mercury retrograde in their 4th house, where it makes life in the home vulnerable to misunderstandings, especially involving your parents, which are another Saturn signification. Since Saturn indicates longevity, this could set up a problem that takes a long time to resolve. Now would not be a good time to put other 4th house significations, such as property and assets, at risk. When Mercury moves to Scorpio, it messes up your 3rd house of everyday activities. Since Mercury is a general significator of daily operations anyway, this is an especially problematic situation. Your 3rd house will, at best, get all delayed and may even backfire regarding your efforts and initiatives. The addition of Venus indicates the problems will likely involve young females. If you are Libra rising, Mercury retrograde starts out in your 3rd house. Saturn is already here, indicating difficulties and delays in getting your desires satisfied. Retrograde Mercury increases the problem, suggesting that this would be a time to just lie low and wait it out. When Mercury backs into Scorpio, the effects start to manifest in your 2nd house, where the misunderstandings transfer to your relationships with family members and how you deal with money issues. Retrograde Mercury plus Venus in Scorpio in your 2nd house of speech means you will be prompted by your selfish desires to say things which will be criticized by others as misleading. For Scorpio rising people, the Mercury retrograde period begins in your 2nd house, where by combining with Saturn, it produces misunderstandings that have long-term consequences. Therefore, best to consider carefully before speaking. Since this is the 2nd house of money and materiality, this would not be a good time to be making decisions regarding purchases or personal money management. When Mercury backs into Scorpio, it affects you even more directly, and by combining with Venus in your 1st house, encourages the natural seductive qualities of your rising sign, but will likely produce the reverse of what you are trying to achieve. Sagittarius rising people experience the effects of the first week of retrograde Mercury in their ascendant, where by combining with Saturn, the mistakes and misunderstandings of retro Mercury will likely have long-term consequences. Daily operations, as signified by Mercury, become hampered by difficulties, so best to lie low and stick to routine actions. When Mercury backs into Scorpio, it will affect your 12th house, and by combining with Venus, set up a situation for fulfilling desires through 12th house hidden actions, something that Venus in Scorpio is already prone to do. But be careful, the 12th is the house of loss and expense, and Mercury is the planet of transactions. So beware of financial dealings, especially those designed to bring you pleasure that would instead lead to losses. For Capricorn rising charts, the retrograde Mercury period starts out in your 12th house. This is actually a good position for introspection, especially with the naturally ascetic planet Saturn. But the 12th house is also the house of expense, and Mercury is the planet of transactions. So be careful that any financial dealings don't result in losses. When Mercury retrogrades into Scorpio, it will affect your 11th house, the house of friends and associates. Careful that you don't suffer from misunderstandings with these relationships. Also, since Venus is the planet of advice and guidance, the well-meaning counsel of 11th house people is suspect and or more inclined to your own misinterpretation. This also applies to another 11th house and Venus significations, profits and money. Don't get sucked into one of those get-rich-quick schemes. If you are Aquarius rising, Mercury retrograde afflicts your 11th house of friends and associates for the first week. Saturn signifies older people. Retrograde Mercury signifies misunderstandings. So be careful in your communications with these people in your life. This combination can also delay any rewards that you may be expecting. Once Mercury retrogrades into Scorpio, it will affect your 10th house of career and professional activities. With Venus already here, you are inclined to perform self-serving actions that you expect will enhance your status, but when retrograde Mercury joins in, such attempts will likely backfire. And for Pisces rising charts, retrograde Mercury will first afflict your 10th house of profession, where things are a bit rough already due to Saturn forcing you to take on more responsibility and work hard. Now, with retrograde Mercury, you will endure misunderstandings, so despite your best efforts, things turn out not in your favor. Also, careful about making career decisions during this time. Saturn, the planet of longevity, ensures the resulting problem will plague you well into the future. But it's only for a week. Then Mercury backs into your 9th house, joining up with Venus, where despite your best intentions, there will be screw-ups in your relationship with father and or guru. Your attempts at doing good deeds will similarly meet with unintended results. Long-distance travel looks tempting, but better to wait until the retrograde is over before embarking on a trip. So, to sum up, this retrograde period will be a bit complicated due to affecting 2 different signs and 2 other planets in the zodiac. Think of it as happening in 2 stages. First stage is from December 3rd to 10th and afflicts your life, indicated by the position of Sagittarius in your Vedic astrology chart. This time period you want to be careful of making decisions, since the mistakes typical of Mercury retrograde will have long-lasting effects due to Saturn's presence. Then, the second part runs from December 10th to December 22nd, afflicting the part of your life indicating by Scorpio's position in your chart. Venus in Scorpio tends to promote selfishness. The combination with retrograde Mercury shows that these self-serving actions will likely backfire. And now, in closing, my little pitch for donations. If you appreciate what I'm doing here and would like to see it continue, please help support this work by making a contribution. Just click on or touch the donation card you see here. Thanks, and until next week.